The machines say she's gone. Every scan, every test, every number on every screen tells us there's nothing left to save. But I've been cleaning this room for 63 days, and I'm telling you something is still there. In the sterile halls of Dallas Presbyterian Hospital's Executive Medical Wing, where the privileged receive care that most can only dream of, a battle is being fought that money cannot win. Lois White, the 37-year-old wife of tech billionaire Raymond White, lies motionless in Suite 412, surrounded by the most advanced medical equipment in the world. Her brain activity is minimal. Her prognosis is grim. The consensus among the 6 specialists on her case is unanimous: it's time to let go. But Kecia Parker sees something different. She's not supposed to be in the room during medical consultations. She's not supposed to touch the patient or speak to the family. She's certainly not supposed to keep detailed notes about what she observes while emptying trash bins and mopping floors. Yet for the past 2 months, while doctors rotated in and out, ordering tests and shaking their heads, Kecia has been present in a way that perhaps only someone invisible to the system can be. What she's about to do will either save a life or end her career, possibly both. The hospital smelled different at 4 in the morning, antiseptic mixed with possibility, before the day's chaos drowned everything in urgency and desperation. Kecia Parker breathed it in as she pushed through the employee entrance of Dallas Presbyterian, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder, thermos of coffee clutched in her hand like a talisman against the pre-dawn darkness. She was 30 years old, and she knew every corner of this building better than most of the doctors who swept through its halls. 7 years of arriving before the sun, of moving through spaces while they were still quiet and clean, of watching and listening and being utterly, completely invisible. The locker room was empty when she changed into her teal scrubs, pulling her braids back with practiced efficiency. She checked her reflection in the scratched mirror, the same face she'd worn yesterday and the day before, unremarkable to everyone who mattered. Then she loaded her cleaning cart with methodical precision: disinfectant, microfiber cloths, mop, bucket, gloves. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as it should be. At 22, she'd held a different future in her hands. The acceptance letter from UT Arlington's nursing program had been thick and official, heavy with promise. She could still remember the weight of it, the way her grandmother's face had lit up when she'd read it aloud in their small South Dallas apartment. "My baby, a nurse. Your mama would be so proud." 6 weeks later, her grandmother had the stroke. 6 weeks after that, Kecia had withdrawn from school to become a full-time caregiver. The choice hadn't felt like a choice at all. You didn't abandon the woman who raised you, who taught you everything that mattered, who stayed up nights reading medical books aloud because she believed knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. Her grandmother had died on a Tuesday, in a hospital much like this one, with Kecia holding her hand and promising to finish what she'd started. That had been 8 years ago. The promise remained unfulfilled. On day 1, Kecia's supervisor assigned her to the executive wing, the 5th floor, where Dallas's wealthy and powerful came to receive care that most people couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. Suite 412 was her last stop on the rotation, and when she pushed open the door with her hip cart rattling softly, she stopped breathing for just a moment. The woman in the bed was beautiful even in stillness. Lois White, according to the chart hanging outside the door, though Kecia wasn't supposed to read those. 37 years old, wife of tech billionaire Raymond White, admitted 3 days ago with a mysterious neurological event. The machines surrounding her hummed and beeped in rhythmic conversation, monitoring vitals that Kecia understood better than anyone knew. Expensive flower arrangements crowded the windowsill: roses, orchids, lilies, their perfume fighting with the sterile hospital smell. Kecia cleaned in silence, moving efficiently around the equipment, careful not to disturb anything. She'd learned to make herself smaller over the years, to take up less space, to never give anyone a reason to notice or complain. But even as she worked, part of her mind cataloged everything: the shallow rise and fall of Lois's chest, the steady green line of the heart monitor, the 4 drip counting down the minutes in measured drops. For 2 days, the routine remained unchanged. Kecia arrived at 4, worked through her floor, reached 412 around 6:30, cleaned, and left. She saw doctors come and go, their white coats bright against the dim lighting. their voices confident as they discussed scans and prognosis in language that danced just beyond Kecia's formal education, but well within her understanding. On day 3, everything shifted. Kecia was humming while she mopped the floor near Lois's bed, an old spiritual her grandmother used to sing while she worked her small garden, coaxing life from stubborn Texas soil. The melody came without thought, automatic as breathing. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. She saw the movement in her peripheral vision and froze mid-stroke. Lois's right index finger had twitched. Not much, just a small contraction, a flexing that most people would have missed. But Kecia had spent years watching for small things, for the subtle signals that revealed truth beneath surfaces. Her eyes shot to the monitors. Everything flat, steady, unchanged. No indication of increased neural activity, no spike in any measurement. She glanced at the clock, 3:43 a.m., then back at Lois's hand. It lay motionless now, pale against the white sheets. Kecia's heart hammered. She looked around the empty room as if someone might materialize to confirm what she'd seen. But there was only her, the machines, and the woman suspended between life and whatever came after. She pulled the small notebook from her scrub pocket, the same one she'd used to record her grandmother's herb recipes and folk remedies, and made her first entry. Day 3, 3:43 a.m. Right index finger movement. Grandmother's song. No monitor changes. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the finger move, kept questioning whether she'd imagined it, kept hearing her grandmother's voice. Trust what you see, baby. Your eyes don't lie, even when everything else does. The next day, Kecia arrived at 4 a.m. but deliberately changed her routine. She cleaned 412 first instead of last, approaching at 4:15. She hummed the same song. Nothing. At 3:30 the following morning, she positioned herself in the room early, ostensibly organizing her supplies while the melody played softly from her lips. At 3:43, Lois's finger moved again. Kecia's breath caught. She moved closer, watching. The monitors remained unchanged, but the movement was there, unmistakable now that she knew to look for it. She tried different songs, different times. The responses were inconsistent but present, a twitch here, a flutter of eyelids there, a slight increase in pulse that the machines caught, but the doctors never saw because they weren't there at 3 in the morning when the hospital held its breath. By day 7, her notebook contained pages of careful observations. She began using her breaks differently, haunting the hospital's medical library instead of the cafeteria. She pulled journals on coma patients, on consciousness studies, on circadian rhythms, and their relationship to brain activity. She cross-referenced with memories of her grandmother treating people the county hospital had sent home to die using specific herbs at specific times, understanding that healing had its own rhythm that didn't always align with standard medical protocols. The research opened. Possibilities. Atypical locked-in syndrome. Minimal consciousness states. Neuroplasticity. Environmental stimuli affecting brain activity in ways standard monitoring couldn't capture. The more Kecia read, the more convinced she became that Lois White wasn't gone. She was trapped, and she was fighting. But every time Kecia tried to mention her observations, the world reminded her of her place. On day 10, she was in 412 when Drive Marcus Thornhill entered with 2 residents. Kecia stepped back against the wall, making herself invisible as they discussed the case. She listened as Dr. Thornhill explained the hopelessness of Lois's condition, the futility of continued aggressive treatment. When he paused, Kecia opened her mouth, just started to speak, to mention the patterns she'd noticed, and he walked past her to adjust a monitor, continuing his lecture as if she hadn't made a sound, as if she wasn't even there. The residents followed him out without a single glance in her direction. On day 12, a security guard found her in 412 at 3:30 a.m. "Ma'am, you need to move along. This room doesn't need a half-hour cleaning job. Stay out of patient rooms when you're not actively cleaning." Kecia nodded, apologized, left. But the words stung deeper than they should have. Was she imagining things? Seeing patterns that existed only in her desperate need to matter, to use the knowledge her grandmother had died believing she possessed? Maybe the doctors were right. Maybe she was just a cleaner playing at medicine, dangerous in her ignorance. That night, she sat at her tiny kitchen table and stared at her notebook. 15 entries now, detailed and precise. She thought about throwing it away, about accepting her role and staying in her lane. Instead, she opened it to a new page and kept writing. By day 15, Kecia had made her decision. The medical team was discussing end-of-life planning. She'd overheard them outside 412, talking about bringing the family in for difficult conversations. If she was wrong, she'd lose her job and confirm every doubt she'd ever had about herself. But if she was right and said nothing, Lois White would die. She found Dr. Thornhill's office number in the directory. She practiced in the staff bathroom at 6 a.m., watching herself in the mirror, trying to sound confident and competent. Dr. Thornhill, I know I'm just a cleaner, but no. Dr. Thornhill, I've noticed some patterns better. Dr. Thornhill, I have some observations that she couldn't find the right words. There were no right words for what she needed to say, no language that would make someone like him listen to someone like her. At 6:30, she stood outside his office, notebook clutched in both hands. Her palms were sweating. Her heart was racing. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to be grateful for the job she had, to remember what happened to people who reached above their station. But she could still see Lois's finger moving. She could still hear her grandmother's voice. She could still feel the weight of all the knowledge she'd accumulated in the margins of other people's lives. Kecia raised her hand and knocked. Dr. Marcus Thornhill didn't look up when Kecia entered his office. He was reading something on his computer screen, one hand holding a coffee cup, the other scrolling through what looked like brain scans. Kecia stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds before he acknowledged her presence with a slight lift of his chin. Yes, her prepared speech evaporated. Dr. Thornhill, I'm Kecia Parker. I clean the executive wing, and I've been observing Mrs. White in Suite 412. I've noticed some patterns in her responses that I think might be. I appreciate your concern, he said, still not looking at her, but leave the medicine to the professionals. If you're not here to clean, you need to leave. I have rounds in 5 minutes. But if you would just look at my notes. She stepped forward, opening her notebook. Now he looked at her, and his expression was not unkind, just utterly indifferent. Ma'am, I'm sure you mean well, but Mrs. White has been examined by 6 specialists. We've run every test available. I don't need to see your notes. The pause before the last word said everything about what he thought of her observations. Now, if you'll excuse me. The door closed before Kecia could respond. She stood in the empty hallway, notebook still open in her hands, heat crawling up her neck. The humiliation was worse than she'd expected, not because he'd been cruel, but because he'd made her feel foolish for even trying. As if her 15 days of careful observation were nothing more than a child's attempt to play doctor. 2 hours later, her supervisor pulled her aside. Maria's face was tight with frustration. Kecia, what the hell were you thinking? Security got a complaint that you've been spending too much time in patient rooms. And now you're bothering doctors? Girl, I went to bat for you to get this position. The executive wing is premium assignment. Don't make me regret it. I wasn't bothering anyone. I just noticed you're here to clean, not to notice. Stay in your lane, or I'll have to write you up. Understand? Kecia nodded, throat tight. Yes, ma'am. But she couldn't stop. That night, she returned to Suite 412 at her usual time, moving through her cleaning routine while watching Lois's still form. At 3:43, she hummed the spiritual softly. Lois's hand moved the same finger, the same small twitch. Kecia noted it in her book, hands shaking slightly as she wrote. On day 18, she encountered Raymond White for the first time. It was 2 in the morning, and she almost didn't recognize him at first, this disheveled man in rumpled clothes sitting on the floor outside Suite 412, his back against the wall, head in his hands. The billionaire tech mogul looked like he hadn't slept in days. Kecia hesitated, her cart creaking softly as she approached. He looked up, and she saw raw grief in his eyes. Sorry, he said automatically, standing. I'm in your way. No, sir, you're fine. She started to move past, then stopped. This might be her only chance. Mr. White, I know this isn't my place, but I've been noticing some things about your wife. Response patterns that the doctors might not be seeing because they're not here during certain hours. If I could just show you. He looked at her with such desperate hope that it hurt. You've seen something? Is there a chance? I think so. I've been documenting. What's your background? Are you a neurologist? A researcher? I might clean the rooms. But I've been observing her for weeks now, and there are patterns. The hope in his face dimmed. I appreciate your concern, really. But the doctors are handling it. They know what they're doing. He gave her a sad smile. Thank you, though. It's kind of you to care. He disappeared into suite 412, and Kecia stood alone in the hallway, feeling invisible again. Day 20 brought an unexpected ally. Kecia had left her notebook on the break room table while she refilled her cleaning supplies. When she returned, a young woman in a white coat was paging through it, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kecia's stomach dropped. "That's mine." The woman looked up, and Kecia recognized her Dr. Jennifer Martinez, one of the new residents who'd started a few months ago. Unlike most doctors, she'd occasionally nodded at Kecia in the hallways, even said good morning once or twice. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have looked," Dr. Martinez said, but she didn't close the notebook. "But this is actually really detailed. You're documenting response patterns for the patient in 412? Kecia nodded warily, waiting for the dismissal, the lecture, the threat. "Where did you learn to document like this? This is better than half the notes I've seen from attendings." The question caught Kecia off guard. "My grandmother. She practiced traditional medicine. Herbs, timing, observation. She always said you had to write everything down, that patterns reveal themselves over time if you're patient enough to see them." Dr. Martinez sat down, gesturing for Kecia to join her. "Tell me what you've noticed." For the first time, someone listened. Kecia walked her through the observations, the response windows, the patterns that emerged only in the pre-dawn hours when the hospital was quiet. Dr. Martinez asked questions, good questions, medical questions that showed she was taking it seriously. "This is fascinating," she said finally. "I mean, it could be coincidence, observer bias, but the documentation is thorough enough that it's worth investigating. Have you shown this to Dr. Thornhill?" He wasn't interested. Dr. Martinez's expression darkened. Of course he wasn't. She tapped the notebook thoughtfully. "Can I look into this?" Quietly. "I don't want to get you in trouble, but if you're right, if I'm right, Mrs. White might have a chance." Exactly. It was the first real hope Kecia had felt since knocking on Thornhill's door. That night, as she cleaned an empty patient room, a memory surfaced unbidden. She was 8 years old, watching her grandmother tend to Mr. Johnson from down the street. He'd been sent home from the county hospital with pneumonia, told there was nothing more they could do. Kecia's grandmother had fed him broths made from specific herbs, had positioned him to catch morning sunlight, had sung to him in a low voice during certain hours of the day. "Why do you sing to him, Grandma?" "Because his body remembers rhythms even when his mind can't. We're all connected to the earth's turning, baby. Light and dark, wake and sleep. Sometimes we just need reminding." Her grandmother had looked at her then, serious. "Doctors know the science, baby, but we know the person. Both matter. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Mr. Johnson had recovered. The hospital called it a miracle. Her grandmother had called it paying attention. Over the next week, Kecia escalated her approach. She timed her cleaning to coincide with predicted response windows. She brought a small speaker and played different types of music, classical, jazz, gospel, noting which ones produced reactions. She experimented with scents, bringing lavender oil one night, peppermint another. She varied her voice patterns, speaking softly to Lois as if they were friends. The responses grew more consistent. Lois's finger movements, slight changes in breathing patterns. Once, a flutter of eyelids during a particular Mahalia Jackson song. None of it showed up dramatically on the monitors, but it was there. Kecia would stake her life on it. But she was taking risks, and people were noticing. On day 27, her coworker Denise cornered her in the supply closet. "Girl, what are you doing?" "What do you mean? Don't play with me. You're spending way too much time in that room, playing music, talking to patients. You think I don't see? You think security don't see?" Denise's voice was urgent, worried. "You gonna get us all in trouble. You ain't no doctor. Stop playing in these white folks' business." "I'm not playing at anything. That woman is still conscious, Denise. She's trapped, and nobody's helping her because nobody's really looking, because it's not our job to. Look, our job is to clean and go home and not get fired for overstepping. You think they care about what you see? You think they're gonna listen to a black woman with a mop bucket over all their fancy degrees?" Denise shook her head. "You're gonna lose this job, Kecia. And for what? For nothing. For someone who deserves a chance. She's got doctors for that. You're the help. Remember your place." The words stung because they were true, or at least, they were true in the world they both lived in. Kecia had no credentials, no authority, no voice that anyone would hear. She was the help. That's all she'd ever be in a place like this. That night, she almost gave up. She stood in suite 412 at 3:30 a.m., looking at Lois's peaceful face, and wondered if everyone was right. Maybe she was seeing patterns that didn't exist, imposing meaning on random movements because she desperately wanted to matter. Maybe this was just another version of her grandmother's medicine folk wisdom that felt true but couldn't be proven, that worked sometimes through coincidence or placebo effect. She started to leave. Then she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted but alert. "Is this the time?" she whispered. Kecia checked her watch. 3 minutes. "Can I observe?" They waited in silence. At 3:43, Kecia began humming the spiritual. Her grandmother's voice seemed to join hers across the years, across the divide between living and dead, across all the spaces where women like them had known things they weren't supposed to know. Lois's finger moved. Then her eyelid fluttered. Then, and this was new, her heart rate increased slightly on the monitor. Just a small spike, barely noticeable, but there. Dr. Martinez stared at the screen, then at Lois, then at Kecia. Her eyes were wide, her expression transformed. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're right." Dr. Martinez presented her findings during the Tuesday morning medical team meeting. Kecia knew about it only because Dr. Martinez had texted her the night before they'd exchanged numbers after that breakthrough moment in Suite 412, though Kecia still felt strange about a doctor wanting to stay in contact with a cleaner. "I want to give you credit," Dr. Martinez had said. "You deserve to be acknowledged for this." Kecia waited in the supply closet on the 5th floor, close enough to hear if anyone came looking for her, far enough to avoid being seen. Her stomach churned. She'd barely slept, running through every possible outcome, most of them ending with her escorted out by security. Dr. Martinez emerged 40 minutes later, her face flushed. She found Kecia and pulled her into an empty patient room. "Some of them were interested," she said quickly. "Dr. Chen from neurology wants to run some tests during your predicted response windows." Dr. Patel asked really good questions about the methodology. But Thornhill, she stopped, her expression darkening. "What did he say?" "He accused you of tampering. With the patient, with the equipment, maybe both. He said you have no medical training, that you could be causing harm, that this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. He called it dangerous pseudoscience and said the hospital would be liable if we gave credence to folk medicine observations from unqualified staff." The words hit like physical blows. "Did you tell them I haven't touched her except to clean around her? That I'm just documenting what I see?" "I told them everything. But Thornhill has been here 20 years. He's published, respected, connected, and I'm a first-year resident who's backing a cleaning lady's observations over established protocols." Dr. Martinez's voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry. I thought if I presented it right, they'd see it's not your fault." But Kecia felt something cold settling in her chest. She'd known this was a possibility. She just hadn't let herself believe it would actually happen. By lunch, hospital administration had opened an investigation. The HR director, a thin woman with severe glasses and an even more severe expression, called Kecia into her office at 2 p.m. "Ms. Parker, we've received serious allegations that you've been spending unauthorized time with a patient, possibly interfering with medical care. You've been observed entering patient rooms outside your cleaning duties, playing music, using unauthorized substances, lavender oil, for aromatherapy. It's not unauthorized. People bring it all the time, not administered by cleaning staff. They don't." The director folded her hands on her desk. "Ms. Parker, I understand you may have good intentions, but you've overstepped your role significantly. Dr. Thornhill has expressed concerns about potential harm to the patient. Until we complete our investigation, you're suspended without pay, effective immediately. You're not even going to ask me what I observed? Why I did it? This isn't a discussion. Security will escort you out. You'll be contacted when we've reached a decision." Kecia sat in the HR office in her teal scrubs, the same ones she'd worn when she first noticed Lois's finger move and felt her world crumbling. Not just for herself, though. Losing her job would mean losing her apartment, her health insurance, everything she'd worked for. But for Lois, who would go back to being truly alone, with no one watching during those crucial pre-dawn hours when her consciousness flickered like a candle flame fighting to stay lit. "Can I at least?" Kecia's voice broke. "Can I see her one more time? Just to say goodbye?" "I'm afraid that's not possible." Security walked her out at 2:30 p.m. She'd been at Dallas Presbyterian for 7 years, and no one she passed in the hallway met her eyes. Even Maria, her supervisor, looked away. By evening, The story would be all over the hospital, the cleaner who thought she was a doctor, who'd been playing with a coma patient like some kind of faith healer, who'd been removed for everyone's safety. On day 33, Raymond White appeared at Kecia's apartment door. She opened it in her pajamas at 10 a.m., having barely left her bed since the suspension. He stood in the hallway of her modest South Dallas complex, looking wildly out of place in his expensive suit, his expression a mixture of anger and something else she couldn't quite read. "Mr. White, Dr. Thornhill told me to look into your background." His voice was tight, controlled. "He said you'd been misrepresenting yourself. So I did some digging. You told me you'd been observing my wife. You showed me that notebook with all its medical terminology. You let me think you had medical expertise. I never said I was a doctor. You're not even a nurse." His control cracked. "You got accepted to nursing school 8 years ago and never finished. 1 semester, that's all you completed. And now you're playing doctor with my wife, experimenting on her while she's helpless. And you want me to believe you're trying to help?" Kecia felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I wasn't experimenting. I was observing. There's a difference. My wife is dying, Ms. Parker. Actually dying. And you're playing out some fantasy where you get to be the hero because you couldn't hack nursing school. Do you have any idea how cruel that is? How desperate I am for hope? I almost believed you." His voice broke. "I wanted so badly to believe someone saw something the doctors didn't. I did see something. I do see something. If you would just let me show you, stay away from my wife. Stay away from my family. If I find out you've been anywhere near that hospital, I'll make sure you never work in healthcare again. Do you understand?" He left before she could respond. Kecia closed the door and slid down against it, finally letting the tears come. The worst part was that she understood his anger. From his perspective, she was exactly what everyone said: unqualified, overreaching, dangerous. A woman who'd failed at nursing school and was now trying to prove something at his wife's expense. But she knew what she'd seen. She knew it the way she'd known her grandmother was dying 3 days before the doctors admitted it. The way she'd known Mr. Johnson would recover when everyone else had given up. Some knowledge didn't come from textbooks or credentials. It came from paying attention, from being present, from caring enough to notice what others missed. The problem was that no one valued that kind of knowledge anymore. If it couldn't be measured, published, or credentialed, it didn't exist. On day 35, Dr. Martinez texted, "I'm so sorry. They told me to stop contact with you or face disciplinary action. I tried to argue, but I'm just a resident. I can't risk my career. I hope you understand." Kecia typed and deleted 3 responses before finally writing, "I understand. Thank you for believing me, even for a little while." She was alone now. Completely alone. Day 38 brought worse news, filtered through a friend who still worked at the hospital. Lois's condition was deteriorating. Without the consistent stimulation Kecia had been providing, her response patterns had diminished. Worse, she developed a respiratory infection common in long-term coma patients. But this one was aggressive. The medical team was discussing accelerating end-of-life decisions. Kecia wanted to scream. She wanted to storm the hospital, to shake Dr. Thornhill and make him see what his pride was costing. But she was powerless. She tried to speak and been silenced. She tried to help and been expelled. She was exactly what the world had always told her: she was invisible, irrelevant, wrong. On day 40, she took the bus to the hospital and stood across the street, looking up at the 5th-floor windows. She couldn't tell which one was Suite 412, but she imagined she could feel Lois's presence, could sense her consciousness fading without someone there to remind her body to keep fighting. "I'm sorry," Kecia whispered to the building, to Lois, to her grandmother's memory. "I tried. I really tried." A security guard she recognized from her escort out noticed her and started walking her direction. Kecia left before he could reach her. She couldn't even stand outside the hospital without being seen as a threat. By day 43, Kecia had applied for jobs at 3 other hospitals and 2 nursing homes. All rejected her within days. Word had spread. She was the cleaner who'd overstepped, who'd endangered a patient, who couldn't be trusted to stay in her lane. No one in healthcare would hire her. She sat in her apartment with bills she couldn't pay and a notebook full of observations no one valued, and wondered how much worse things could get. The envelope arrived on day 45. It was from Dallas Presbyterian's legal department, formal and cold. Inside was a cease and desist letter warning her against any further contact with the White family or discussion of Lois White's case, and a notification that the hospital would be pursuing legal action if she violated these terms. Attached was another document notice of family meeting scheduled for day 63 regarding withdrawal of life support for Lois Margaret White. Kecia read it 3 times before the words fully registered. 18 days. In 18 days, they would gather to discuss letting Lois die. The woman she'd watched fight every night at 3:43 a.m., whose finger had moved to her grandmother's spirituals, who'd responded to Mahalia Jackson and lavender oil, and the simple presence of someone who believed she was still there, that woman would be allowed to slip away because no one with the right credentials had seen what Kecia had seen. She sat at her kitchen table as afternoon lights slanted through her window, illuminating the notebook that had become evidence of her failure rather than proof of her insight. The page was still open to her last entry, made the night before her suspension day 31. 3:43 a.m. Strong response to him. His eye is on the sparrow. Finger movement, eyelid flutter, increased heart rate, 2-3 BPM. Patient is present. Patient is fighting. 18 days to figure out how to save someone who'd already given up on her. 18 days to find her voice in a system designed to keep her silent. Kecia closed the notebook and held it against her chest like a shield. She had no job, no credibility, no allies, and no idea how to fight institutional power. But she had 18 days. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The pediatric wing smelled like crayons and antiseptic, a strange combination that Kecia couldn't get used to. On day 46, her suspension ended with a humiliating reinstatement meeting where she'd signed papers acknowledging her inappropriate conduct and promising to maintain professional boundaries. They'd transferred her away from the executive wing. Too much liability, they said. Too much drama. She was lucky to still have a job at all. Lucky. The word tasted like ash. She went through the motions, arriving at 4 a.m., changing into scrubs that no longer felt like armor, loading her cart with supplies that now felt like symbols of failure. The pediatric wing was brighter than the executive floor, decorated with painted murals of animals and superheroes, but Kecia moved through it like a ghost. She avoided the 5th floor hallway entirely, couldn't bear to walk past Suite 412 and know that Lois was in there, her consciousness flickering without anyone to witness it. The other cleaners had heard the story. Some avoided her. Others offered sympathetic looks, but no words. They had their own jobs to protect. Denise, who'd warned her to stay in her lane, didn't speak to her at all. On the morning of day 50, Kecia woke before her alarm and knew she couldn't face another shift pretending everything was fine. She called in sick for the first time in 7 years, then drove to Laurelland Cemetery in South Dallas. Her grandmother's grave was in the older section, where the headstones tilted slightly and grass grew wild between the plots. Kecia hadn't visited since the funeral, couldn't bear to see that final proof that the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her to trust her observations, who'd promised she was enough, was really gone. The morning was cold for Dallas in late fall. Kecia sat on the ground beside the grave, her jacket pulled tight, and finally let herself break. "I tried, Grandma," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to use what you taught me, to see what needed seeing. But nobody listens to people like us." They looked at me and saw a cleaner, not a person who could know things. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I never was. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead. Her grandmother didn't answer. Of course she didn't. Dead was dead, and all the folk wisdom in the world couldn't change that. "You told me I had the sight, that I could see what others missed. But what good is seeing if nobody believes you? What good is knowing if knowing doesn't change anything?" Kecia's voice broke. "I watched her fight, Grandma. I saw her in there, conscious and trapped and scared. And now she's going to die because I couldn't make them listen. Because I'm nobody." She stayed until her legs went numb, until the tears dried on her face, until the grief and anger and frustration collapsed into a hollow exhaustion. Then she drove home and slept for 14 hours. On day 52, a child in the pediatric wing changed everything. Kecia was cleaning room 318, trying to be invisible as usual, when the 7-year-old patient, a girl named Maya with leukemia and a head wrap covered in glittery stars, spoke to her. "Why do you look so sad?" Kecia glanced up, surprised. Most patients, even children, didn't really see her. "I'm not sad, honey. Just tired. My mom says that too when she's sad, but doesn't want to talk about it." Maya considered this seriously. "Sometimes grown-ups don't listen to me either." "What do you mean?" Like, I told the doctors my arm hurt in a different way than usual, but they said it was just the normal hurt from the medicine. But it wasn't. It was different. It took them 3 days to believe me, and then they found out I was right, I had an infection. Maya shrugged. Sometimes grown-ups don't listen to me. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong. Just means they're not listening good. Kecia stood very still, mop in hand, staring at this small person who'd just articulated everything she'd been feeling. You're very wise, she said quietly. My grandma was wise too. She died last year. I still talk to her sometimes, even though my dad says that's silly. Maya looked at Kecia seriously. Do you think it's silly? No, Kecia said, her throat tight. I don't think it's silly at all. That night, for the first time since her suspension, Kecia opened her notebook. She read through all her observations, seeing them with fresh eyes. The patterns were there. Undeniable. Consistent. Real. Just because no one with credentials had witnessed them didn't make them less true. Maybe she'd been asking the wrong question. Not how do I make them believe me, but how do I make them unable to ignore me? Across town, Dr. Jennifer Martinez was having her own crisis of conscience. Since being warned off contact with Kecia, she'd tried to let it go, to focus on her residency and forget about the cleaning lady's observations. But she couldn't. Late at night in the medical library, she'd started searching. Atypical locked-in syndrome, minimal consciousness variance, circadian patterns in coma patients, environmental stimuli affecting neural activity. On day 54, she found it. A case study from Johns Hopkins, published just 6 months ago. A patient presenting with symptoms exactly matching what Kecia had documented: inconsistent responses to stimuli, circadian fluctuations in consciousness, neural activity that didn't register on standard monitoring but became apparent through systematic observation over time. Then another case from Boston General. Another from UCSF. 7 cases in total, all within the past 3 years, all describing a variant of locked-in syndrome that could easily be mistaken for permanent unconsciousness unless someone was watching at the right times, in the right ways. Dr. Martinez sat in the empty library at 2 a.m., surrounded by printed studies, and felt her entire worldview shifting. Kecia had been right. Not accidentally, not through luck. She'd been systematically, observationally, scientifically right. And they'd punished her for it. Revealing this could cost Dr. Martinez everything. Dr. Thornhill would see it as insubordination. The hospital would view it as disloyalty. She'd be labeled a troublemaker, someone who couldn't be trusted to follow established protocols. Her career would be over before it truly began. But withholding it would cost Lois White her life. Dr. Martinez made copies of every study and put them in a folder labeled White, L, Research. Then she sent a text to a number she'd promised herself she wouldn't use. I found something. We need to talk. Raymond White was having his own reckoning. On day 57, he sat in suite 412 at 3 in the morning, holding his wife's hand. He'd been doing this more often lately, coming when the hospital was quiet, when there were no doctors to give him statistics or nurses to check vitals, when it was just him and Lois and the machines that said she was already gone. I'm sorry, he whispered to her still face. I'm sorry I didn't listen when that woman tried to tell me you were still in there. I was so angry at the doctors for not fixing you, at God for letting this happen, at myself for not being able to buy your recovery with all my money. And when she tried to give me hope, I lashed out because hope hurt too much. He thought about Kecia Parker, the desperation in her eyes when she tried to show him her notebook, the certainty in her voice when she'd said Lois was still fighting. He'd dismissed her because she was a cleaner, because she didn't have the right credentials, because believing her meant admitting that all his expensive specialists might have missed something obvious. I valued credentials over insight, he said to Lois. I valued prestige over presence. And maybe that's why I'm losing you. A nurse came in to check Lois's for the night shift. Nurse, older, kind-faced. She smiled at Raymond sympathetically. How are you holding up, Mr. White? I don't know anymore. He rubbed his face. Has there been any change? Anything at all? The nurse adjusted the 4. Thoughtfully. You know, she seemed more peaceful when that cleaner was around. Miss Parker, I think her name was. She'd come in here at odd hours, and Mrs. White's vitals would settle, almost like she was comforted by the presence. The nurse caught herself. But I probably shouldn't say that. There was that whole situation. What do you mean, comforted? Just that she seemed, I don't know, less agitated. Her breathing would even out. Sometimes her heart rate would actually increase a bit, like she was responding to something. but the doctor said it was probably coincidental. The nurse shrugged. We notice things on night shift that the day staff doesn't see. After the nurse left, Raymond sat in the silence, those words echoing. We notice things on night shift that the day staff doesn't see. Maybe credentials didn't matter as much as he'd thought. Maybe presence did. On day 60, Kecia made her decision. She would attend the family meeting on day 63, invited or not. She would present her findings, show her evidence, make them see what she'd seen. They could call security, ban her from every hospital in Texas, prosecute her for trespassing. She didn't care anymore. Lois deserved someone to fight for her, and Kecia was the only person who'd truly been paying attention. For 2 days, Kecia prepared like she was defending a dissertation. She organized her notebook chronologically, cross-referenced with medical literature she'd printed from public library databases, created a timeline of observations paired with potential medical explanations. She practiced her presentation in front of her bathroom mirror, forcing herself to sound confident even when her voice wanted to shake. Mrs. White shows consistent response patterns during specific circadian windows. She practiced. These responses align with recent case studies of atypical locked-in syndrome variants. With systematic stimulation protocols, there's a strong possibility of meaningful recovery. On day 61, Dr. Martinez texted, "I'm in. I have research that supports everything you documented. They can't ignore both of us." "You'll lose your career," Kecia wrote back. "Maybe, but I'll keep my soul." They met that night at a coffee shop far from the hospital. Dr. Martinez brought her folder of studies. Kecia brought her notebook. They spent 4 hours building their case, anticipating objections, preparing for every possible attack Dr. Thornhill might launch. "He'll say you're biased," Dr. Martinez warned. "That you have a savior complex, that you're too invested to be objective. He'll say you're a naive resident being manipulated by someone unqualified," Kecia countered. "Then we make sure our evidence is so solid that our motivations don't matter." By midnight, they had a plan. It was risky, potentially career-ending for both of them. But it was also the right thing to do, and sometimes that was the only credential that mattered. On day 62, the night before the meeting, Kecia stood across the street from Dallas Presbyterian Hospital. She'd taken the bus, not trusting herself to drive, her notebook heavy in her bag. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. She found the 5th floor by counting up, imagined she could see Suite 412 even though she couldn't tell which window was which. Lois was in there somewhere, consciousness flickering, maybe wondering why the woman who'd sung to her at 3:43 a.m. had suddenly disappeared. "I see you, Lois," Kecia whispered to the building, to the city, to her grandmother's memory. "I see you fighting. And tomorrow, they will too." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and Kecia shivered. She was terrified. She was probably going to fail. She might end up arrested, bankrupt, blacklisted from healthcare forever. But Maya was right. Being wrong and being unheard were two different things. Kecia knew what she'd seen. She knew what she knew. Tomorrow, she would make them listen. Or she would go down trying. The hospital was a different place at 5 in the morning, quiet, liminal, caught between nights ending and days beginning. Kecia stood in the parking lot, her notebook pressed against her chest, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue. She'd barely slept. Her hands were shaking. Dr. Martinez emerged from her car, looking equally exhausted, carrying a messenger bag stuffed with research files. They met in the middle of the parking lot. Two women who shouldn't have been allies, one a first-year resident with everything to lose, the other a cleaner with nothing left but the truth. "You ready?" Dr. Martinez asked. "No." Kecia's voice was hoarse. "But I'm doing it anyway." They found an empty conference room on the 3rd floor and spread everything out. Kecia's notebook with its meticulous observations, Dr. Martinez's case studies, a printed timeline cross-referencing Kecia's documentation with medical literature, a proposed protocol that combined conventional medicine with the systematic stimulation approach Kecia had discovered. "They're going to attack your credibility first," Dr. Martinez said, reviewing the materials one last time. "They'll say you're unqualified, that your observations are contaminated by bias, that you've overstepped dangerous boundaries. Let them." Kecia's voice was steadier than she felt. "I know what I saw, and they'll come for me next. Say I'm too inexperienced to evaluate the evidence properly, that I've been manipulated, have you?" Dr. Martinez looked up, met Kecia's eyes. No, your documentation is better than most attending physicians. Your observations align perfectly with recent research on atypical locked-in syndrome variants. If you had the right credentials, you'd be publishing papers, not cleaning floors. She paused. The system failed you, and it's failing Lois White. At 8:30, they took the elevator to the 5th floor. Kecia's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She hadn't been on this floor since her suspension. The familiar smell, antiseptic and flowers and expensive coffee brought back memories of all those pre-dawn hours in Suite 412, humming to a woman the world had decided was already gone. They stopped outside the suite. Through the window, Kecia could see people gathering. Raymond White, looking gaunt and hollow-eyed. An older couple who must be Lois's parents. Dr. Thornhill in his pristine white coat. 2 other doctors she didn't recognize. A hospital administrator in a dark suit. Security's going to be called the moment we walk in, Dr. Martinez warned. I know. You could still walk away. No one would blame you. I would. Kecia gripped her notebook tighter. She's in there fighting. Someone has to fight with her. At 8:45, they entered. The conversation stopped immediately. All eyes turned to them, or rather, to Kecia. She saw Dr. Thornhill's face darken with fury, saw the administrator reach for his phone, saw Raymond's expression shift from confusion to recognition to something that might have been anger. Security, Dr. Thornhill said sharply, we need wait. Raymond's voice cut through the room. He stood slowly, studying Kecia's face. Let her speak. Mr. White, this woman was suspended for interfering with your wife's care. She has no business, I said, let her speak. Raymond's tone allowed no argument. He gestured to Kecia. You came here for a reason. What is it? Kecia's mouth was dry. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to back away, to remember her place. But she thought of Maya in the pediatric wing, of her grandmother's grave, of Lois's finger moving at 3:43 a.m., and she found her voice. Your wife is still conscious. She's trapped in a form of atypical locked-in syndrome that presents as deep coma on standard monitoring. I've documented consistent response patterns over 63 days of observation. With proper stimulation protocols, she has a strong chance of meaningful recovery. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Dr. Thornhill exploded. This is outrageous. You have no medical training, no authority to make such claims. You're giving this family false hope based on what folk medicine and wishful thinking. He turned to Raymond. Mr. White, this woman was suspended for overstepping boundaries, for potentially endangering your wife. She's experiencing a savior complex. Observation bias, I have documentation. Kecia opened her notebook with trembling hands. 63 days of systematic observations. Response patterns correlated with specific stimuli, times, and environmental factors. And Dr. Martinez has research supporting Dr. Martinez is a first-year resident being manipulated by someone who couldn't finish nursing school. Dr. Thornhill's voice was cold. This is irresponsible. It's dangerous. And it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Show me. Raymond's voice was quiet but commanding. Show me your documentation. For the next 20 minutes, Kecia presented everything. Her hands shook at first, her voice wavering. But as she walked through the timeline, day 3, the first finger movement. Day 7, the consistent 3:43 a.m. responses. Day 12, the pattern of reactions to specific music. Day 20, the flutter of eyelids during Mahalia Jackson's Precious Lord. Her confidence grew. This was truth. This was real. No amount of institutional dismissal could change what had actually happened. Dr. Martinez added her evidence. 7 case studies of atypical locked-in syndrome variants, all presenting exactly as Kecia had documented. Research on circadian patterns and consciousness, on environmental stimuli maintaining neural pathways, on the limitations of standard monitoring for detecting minimal consciousness states. The protocol we're proposing, Dr. Martinez explained, combines timed sensory stimulation with conventional supportive care. It's based on peer-reviewed research and Ms. Parker's systematic observations. It's worth trying. Dr. Thornhill shook his head vigorously. This is pseudoscience dressed up in medical language. You're both so invested in being right that you can't see why. Raymond interrupted, looking at Kecia. Why do you care this much about my wife? You don't know her. You gain nothing from this except trouble. So why? The question landed like a physical blow. Kecia thought about all the answers she could give about her grandmother, about her unfinished nursing degree, about needing to prove something. But the truth was simpler and more profound. Because I see her, Kecia said quietly. Not her bank account, not her test results, not her chances or her prognosis, her. The person inside who's still fighting. I've sat with her for 63 mornings at 3:47 a.m., and I've watched her try to come back. She's not giving up. Her voice broke slightly. Someone should fight with her. Someone should see her. Raymond stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Dr. Thornhill. 1 week. We implement their protocol under medical supervision for 1 week. Mr. White, I strongly advise 1 week, or I'm moving my wife to another facility and taking my foundation's funding with me. Raymond's voice was steel. Dr. Martinez, you'll supervise. Yes, sir. Dr. Thornhill stood abruptly. This is a mistake. And when it fails, when this woman's amateur observations prove to be exactly what I said they were, I'll expect full accountability. He looked at Kecia with something close to contempt. People die because of false hope, Miss Parker. I hope you can live with that. He left, and the room exhaled collectively. The protocol began on day 64. Dr. Martinez supervised every intervention, documenting everything with the same meticulous care Kecia had shown. They timed sessions to Kecia's predicted response windows, 3:43 a.m. most days, with additional sessions at 11:20 a.m. and 7:15 p.m. when Kecia's notes suggested heightened awareness. They used the stimuli Kecia had identified: her grandmother's spirituals, Mahalia Jackson, specific sense, even the cadence of Kecia's voice as she'd spoken during her cleaning rounds. Days 64 through 66 brought small responses. Finger movements, slight changes in breathing patterns, occasional heart rate variations. Nothing dramatic, but consistent. Present. Real. On day 67, everything changed. At 3:43 a.m., with Raymond, Dr. Martinez, and a neurologist observing, Kecia sang His Eye is on the Sparrow while a diffuser released lavender oil into the air. Lois's right hand moved, not a twitch, but a deliberate flexing of fingers. Her eyelids fluttered. Her heart rate increased by 7 beats per minute and stayed elevated. The neurologist leaned forward, staring at the monitors. I'll be damned. They continued the session for 30 minutes. Lois's responses remained consistent, sustained. When they finished, the neurologist ordered a new round of advanced imaging that had previously shown no significant activity. The scans revealed something extraordinary. Neural activity in regions associated with consciousness and sensory processing. Activity that hadn't been visible on previous scans because it only occurred during these specific stimulation windows. On day 69, during an afternoon session, Lois's eyes fluttered open for 3 seconds before closing again. Raymond wept. On day 70, with Kecia singing softly and holding Lois's hand, Lois opened her eyes and kept them open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, then slowly sharpened. She couldn't speak, yet the intubation had only been removed hours before, but her eyes tracked movement. She squeezed Kecia's hand weakly when asked. She was back. Over the following days, as Lois's strength returned and she regained the ability to speak, the full picture emerged. She'd been conscious partially, intermittently for most of her coma. Aware but unable to move, unable to signal, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond. The neurological event that had hospitalized her had created a rare variant of locked-in syndrome that manifested in ways standard protocols couldn't detect. I heard you, she told Kecia during a private moment, her voice still weak but clear. Every night at 3:47. Your voice, your songs, they were the only thing that reminded me I was still human, still here. When you stopped coming, tears slid down her face. I thought I'd lost my only anchor. I started to let go. Kecia's own tears fell freely. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't come back sooner. But you did come back. You risked everything. Lois reached for Kecia's hand. You were the only one who knew I was still here. The only one who saw me. The aftermath was complicated. Hospital administration launched an investigation into how Kecia's observations had been dismissed, but institutional change moved slowly. Dr. Thornhill faced no formal discipline, though his reputation suffered. Several doctors admitted privately that they should have listened, but few said so publicly. Raymond White, transformed by the experience, became Kecia's unlikely champion. He funded her return to nursing school with a full scholarship. He established the White Foundation Fellowship for Alternative Medical Perspectives, creating opportunities for people with unconventional backgrounds to integrate their knowledge into healthcare systems. Dr. Martinez's career survived, though barely. She was labeled a troublemaker by some, visionary by others. But she'd kept her soul, and that mattered more. And Kecia returned to school at 30 years old, carrying her grandmother's notebook alongside her textbooks, finally finishing what she'd started 8 years before. On her first day of clinical rotations, 6 months after Lois opened her eyes, Kecia was assigned to the 5th floor. Suite 412 was empty that day, freshly cleaned by someone new. She stood in the doorway, remembering the woman who'd lain there, fighting in silence while the world moved around her unseeing. A voice behind her made her turn. One of the new cleaners, a young woman with tired eyes, was pushing a cart down the hallway. "Excuse me," the woman said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but you're Kecia Parker, right? The one who saved that lady." "I didn't save her. I just saw her." "That's kind of the same thing, isn't it?" The woman fidgeted with her cleaning supplies. "I've been noticing something with a patient in 426. Probably nothing. Probably just me seeing things. But his vitals change at weird times, and I thought she trailed off." "Never mind. You're busy. I should stay in my lane." Kecia felt her grandmother's presence, strong and clear, like a hand on her shoulder. She smiled at the young woman. "Tell me everything you've seen," she said, "and bring your notebook." 6 months after Lois White opened her eyes, Kecia Parker walked through the entrance of Dallas Presbyterian Hospital wearing navy blue nursing student scrubs. The building looked the same: sterile white walls, polished floors, the familiar antiseptic smell, but everything had changed. Or perhaps Kecia had changed, and the building was simply bearing witness. She carried her clinical rotation assignment folder, her stethoscope looped around her neck, and her grandmother's old herb guide tucked in her pocket alongside her smartphone. Some of the older nurses recognized her and nodded. A few whispered. Most had no idea that the composed nursing student passing through their halls had once been invisible to them, just another cleaner moving through their peripheral vision. Her rotation supervisor assigned her to the 5th floor, the executive wing. Kecia felt her breath catch when she heard it, wondered if it was intentional or just coincidence. Either way, she was ready. Suite 412 was empty when she reached it mid-morning. The door stood open, revealing a space that looked exactly as it had 6 months ago. The same monitoring equipment standing silent and dark, the same view of Dallas through the window, the same carefully made bed waiting for its next occupant. But the flower arrangements were gone. The machines weren't beeping. The room held the peculiar stillness of a stage between performances. Kecia stood in the doorway, remembering. She could almost see herself in teal cleaning scrubs, mop in hand, humming her grandmother's spirituals at 3:43 a.m. Could almost see Lois's finger moving, that first small miracle that no one else had witnessed. Could almost feel the weight of the notebook in her pocket, documenting truth that the world wasn't ready to acknowledge. She stepped inside and checked the room with a professional eye. It was immaculate, cleaned to perfection by someone who took pride in their work. Kecia appreciated that. She'd always believed that cleaning was an act of care, of creating space for healing to happen. The person who'd prepared this room understood that. Moving to the bed, she placed her hand on the white sheets where Lois had lain for so many weeks. The fabric was cool and crisp beneath her palm. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of the journey, from invisible to undeniable, from dismissed to vindicated, from cleaner to student nurse. But also from silence to voice, from doubt to certainty, from believing she wasn't enough to knowing she'd always been enough. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, to Lois's memory, to her grandmother's spirit. "Thank you for not letting me give up." A sound in the hallway drew her attention. Kecia turned to see a young woman pushing a cleaning cart, her movements efficient and practiced. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the same teal scrubs Kecia had worn for 7 years. The woman glanced into Suite 412, saw Kecia, and started to move on. "Wait," Kecia said, stepping into the hallway. The cleaner stopped, her expression guarded. Kecia recognized that look, the wariness of someone used to being talked down to, dismissed, made to feel small. "I'm Kecia," she said gently. "I'm doing my clinical rotation on this floor. What's your name?" "Sarah." The woman's posture relaxed slightly. "You need something cleaned?" "No, the room looks perfect. You do good work." Kecia paused. "Actually, I wanted to ask, do you ever notice anything unusual during your rounds? About patients, I mean. Anything the monitors don't show. Sarah's expression shifted surprise, then a flicker of something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed. Why are you asking? Because I used to work where you work. I was a cleaner on this floor for 7 years. And I noticed things. Kecia kept her voice even, inviting. Things that mattered. Sarah hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. There's a patient in 426. Mr. Chun. He's been in a coma for 3 weeks. But when I clean his room early in the morning, around 5:30, his breathing changes. Gets deeper, more regular. And once I saw his hand move, just a little. But when I mentioned it to one of the nurses, she said I was probably imagining things, that I should focus on my job. Kecia felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The cycle continuing, but different this time. Better this time. What else have you noticed? She asked. Sarah pulled a small notebook from her pocket, spiral bound, worn at the edges, filled with careful handwriting. I've been keeping track. Times, dates, what was happening in the room. I know it's probably stupid. I'm not a doctor or anything. But my mother always said to trust what I see, even if other people don't. Kecia's throat tightened. Your mother sounds wise. Can I see? They stood in the hallway of Dallas Presbyterian's executive wing. A nursing student and a cleaner bent over a notebook filled with observations. Sarah's documentation was detailed, systematic, exactly the kind of careful attention that could mean the difference between life and death. This isn't stupid, Kecia said firmly. This is important, and I want to help you present this to the medical team. But first, I need you to know something. What you're doing matters. What you see matters. You matter. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. No one's ever said that before. Not about this. Then they were wrong. Come with me. We're going to talk to my supervisor, and then we're going to check on Mr. Chin together. Kecia met Sarah's gaze steadily. And this time, someone's going to listen. As they walked down the hallway together, Kecia thought about all the invisible people in hospitals: cleaners, aides, transporters, cafeteria workers who moved through spaces bearing witness to things no one asked them about. How many observations were lost because the observer didn't have the right credentials? How many lives could have been saved if someone had simply listened? But that was changing. Slowly, painfully, institutionally resistant to transformation, but changing nonetheless. Because Kecia had learned that being seen wasn't about permission or credentials. It was about refusing to be invisible, about trusting what you knew, about speaking truth even when the world told you to be quiet. Her grandmother had been right all along. Some people had the sight, could see what needed seeing. The trick was having the courage to trust it, and the persistence to make others see it too. Kecia Parker had been invisible for 30 years. But she would never be invisible again. And more importantly, she would make sure that everyone who came after her, every Sarah with a notebook, every person who saw what others missed, would have someone who listened. The cycle was broken. A new one had begun. And this time, it started with seeing. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.